Radio. My name's Glenn Woods. Thanks for joining me. It's a Friday, and sitting in the studio with me today is, I always do this, Cassie, thank you. I'm sorry. Cassie from Wyoming Liberty Group, and today Wyoming Liberty Group wants to focus on specifically schools and school funding, you said, which of course, I'm going to, before you dive into it, I'm going to go back and say, I honestly think we could do a better job if we took a look at local school districts and how much money they spend on administration, things like that. I think they're too top heavy. But what has your research shown?
Well, thank you, Glenn, for having me this morning. The point you brought up is one I think that is of big concern to us. It's a big push in the transparency initiative to kind of see how our schools are spending their money and if that money is following the student into the classroom.
Okay, that's what I'm talking about there, yeah.
Because if you remember the Campbell cases that went up to the Supreme Court, that's what they kind of broke down. You know, is the money being fairly allocated to the student on a fair basis that follows in line with the Constitution? Okay,
so according to our Wyoming State Constitution, they have to fund, and they have to fund. Well, what exactly is the wording there? Because I think it's a little ambiguous here. It doesn't say exactly how much or what the level of it is. It just says, what, adequately?
Well, Glenn, I'm actually writing an entire white paper on that right now, so stay tuned to yliberty.org for sure, because if you look through the case law and how they interpret the Constitution, and that's where you really get, how do we apply this, you get some interesting answers. One is that they have a duty to fund an education system without waste, which I think is interesting verbiage, right?
But does it define what is waste?
No. Right. And so that's where we need to start looking at some options. And all session long, I heard legislators saying we have a constitutional duty to fund education. Right. And if we stop and really think about what that means, inflation and the cost of living and all these are on the rise. Are we going to keep funding education at a higher and higher level? And at any point, is there ever going to be a cap on that or a question as to where this money is going and why?
Okay, I just thought about this. Maybe you can toss this into your white paper. You can steal it. You don't have to give any credit. So we're going to go ahead and we have to fund education. It's constitutional. We have to fund it. Is funding the bureaucracy funding education? Because as you said, it did make it to the classroom. So funding a bigger bureaucracy is not funding education.
Glenn, I'm such a fan.
I'm proud of that.
I completely agree. I think that it's time we start looking at funding students instead of funding systems. I think that we have to do both. Of course, we have to have a powerful and important public school structure and system. We have to have well-paid teachers that are good. But I think that education choice is what's going to start moving the needle toward fiscal sustainability of these government-run schools. Because at a certain point, if we can't afford to run them, what's going to happen? If we don't start thinking about sustainability now, where are we going to be in 10, 20 years?
So you just triggered a bunch of leftists out there by talking about sustainability. I mean, it just drives them crazy. But let's talk about that for just a moment, because when we think about school choice, to me, I'd like to see a voucher system. And does the state of Wyoming have something where people can choose? I want to send my kids to a charter school, or I want to send my kids to a private school, or maybe I want to homeschool, and the money follows them. Where does Wyoming rate on that?
Education choice ratings for Wyoming are pretty poor. And the reason is this. We're not the worst because we have options, right? We have charter schools. We have private schools. They're great. They're among the highest proficiency rates across the state. But the problem, Glenn, is that we don't have accessibility to education choice in Wyoming. And that's a key component. Because if you're restricting a child because his family makes $20,000 a year or lives off SNAP and Medicaid, how is that child going to afford to go to the nice private school? Whereas the upscale neighborhood kid might get to. So it's providing things like vouchers, tax credit scholarships, ESA debit cards like Arizona has implemented that have saved the state thousands in tax dollars. Why? Because you're giving it to the kid, not funding the system.
So we're thinking alike here. Because charter schools and private school and even homeschooling is far cheaper than public schools, you would think the state of Wyoming would want to, and also get better results. You would think the state of Wyoming, to save money, would encourage it.
Yes, Glenn, that's exactly it. And I think it's time that we start opening up the conversation and looking at it within a different environment. I think for far too long, the education choice movement across the country has found itself in opposition with teachers' unions and public schools. I don't think that needs to be the case in Wyoming. I think in Wyoming, we need to use the education choice system as a tool to help us in in this time of need to relieve some of the burden from the public school system, to take some of these kids, to downsize the spending. I think it's a perfect time to start implementing those models, and I think it's time to reframe the constitutional argument. It's more constitutional to fund a kid, not a system. That's how you guarantee equal access to education, is you offer that to every student across the state. Whether or not they accept a voucher is their decision. Plenty will still go to public school, but by making that accessible, that's what's constitutional. That's what it's driving at.
Okay, so that goes back to what I was saying before. If you want to fund education, you're funding the kid, not the bureaucracy. Okay, so is there resistance to that kind of a voucher system in the state of Wyoming?
You know, we haven't gotten in depth on any legislation in quite a while, so I'll be interested to see how this particular legislator feels about those things throughout the interim. There's a couple interim topics dealing with education efficiency, working with the Alvarez study and adopting some of those recommendations. And I think we can start having some of those conversations and testing the waters.
Okay.
I would hope that people would be open to it for a lot of reasons. One, the fiscal savings are definitely there, but two, if you look at states that have implemented these measures, kids do better. Proficiency rates are higher, more kids are going to college. Education choice is all about finding out what's best for that kid. So like I said, you're going to have a wide variety of uses, from homeschooling to public schools to private to charter.
Okay, so let me throw out some of the devil's advocates' arguments then. Well, Wyoming is such a big rural state that, you know, when you get to homeschooling and some private schools, we just don't have that here. And how are kids even going to get to these schools?
I'm so glad you brought that up, because actually rural states have had the best success with their education choice programs for that reason. I'm sure you saw in the news a few weeks ago the $110,000 school district for the one student, I think it was.
Oh, yeah.
We could have maybe avoided some of those situations. In certain rural states, you will find a lot of programs that are online with virtual access, very expansive. You can get homeschooling curriculum packages. You can partake in more technical and vocational type programs, because if we make a better law in Wyoming where it's a better environment for those types of programs to come in, they will. We'll have more access to technical education, and with Wyoming being a rural state, I would think that that would be a great asset to people in rural
See,
communities.
she's got answers for stuff. All right, more with Wyoming Limited Group, and you can ask your questions. 632-6500 is the phone number. It's AM 650 KGAB.
To save on the planet's finest footwear, socks, and accessories? Then you're ready for the Wyoming Work Warehouse Spring Boot Event. All the top brands, plus gifts with purchase while supplies last. Chore boots, safety toe, and met guard. Over boots and safety toe moccasins. Lots of new styles, all marked down 15% or more. The Wyoming Work Warehouse Spring Boot Event. Boot drawings and gift with purchase. Casper, Rock Springs, Gillette, and Cheyenne. Don't miss it.
Here at New Image Dental, we care about your smile.
But most of all, we care about you. Our goal is to provide you and your family with the highest quality dental care in a professional and caring environment.
New Image Dental is conveniently located in downtown Cheyenne, just south of the library. Parking is available. We are open Monday through Friday with a convenient monthly Saturday schedule.
Emergencies are always welcome, and we love to be patient. So come on in.
Bienvenidos.
New Image Dental, 2100 Pioneer Avenue, where we're cleaning the West, one smile at a time.
Are you tired of paying high fees and commissions even when you lose your money? How would you like to never lose your money again due to market risk? Join Al Martinez for the Retirement Income with Al Martinez show on Saturday from 6 to 7 a.m. You can also call Al Martinez now for your complimentary customized retirement and income kit and 115-page retirement and income book at 888-418-3358. That's 888-418-3358.
Do you suffer from painful flat feet that may also be causing knee, hip, or low back pain? I'm Dr. Rick Roper, Cheyenne's only full-time resident podiatrist, and I perform an outpatient surgery to correct flat feet, which may also relieve knee, hip, and low back pain. Whether you wear combat boots or cowboy boots, I'm Dr. Roper, helping you become free from foot, knee, hip, and low back pain. Log on to CheyenneFootDoctor.com.
Visit Cheyenne's newest coffee roastery. Snowy Elk Coffee will be set up this year at Cheyenne's Home and Garden Show at the Cheyenne Ice and Event Center, Friday, April 13th through Sunday, April 15th. Visit the Snowy Elk booth for complimentary samples, fresh roasts, and t-shirts for sale. A truly local coffee roastery at this year's Home and Garden Show. Hope to see you there. For more information or to order coffee and apparel, go to snowyelk.com. That's snowyelk.com.
No radio at the office? Don't do without. Listen at kgab.com or on your mobile with Radio Pub, free on the App Store or Google Play.
8:17 is the time. It's AM 650 KJB Radio. My name is Glenn Woods. Thanks for joining me. I'm here with Wyoming Liberty Group as we talk about school choices, how we're brought to you by Schrader Funeral Home. Don't forget, sooner or later, I'm going to have to kill our newsman, Doug. We all know it's coming. And I'll make sure to have everything taken care of right there at Schrader Funeral Home. They're the people to go to. I'll prearrange his funeral before I just go ahead and kill him. So, all right. We were talking during that commercial break about Florida schools and how now they have a pretty good program there. Do they have a voucher program in Florida?
They have great ESA and tax credit programs. Interestingly, started in part by Jeb Bush and the Bush family, big advocates of education choice. Okay, good.
Well, now let's talk about here again. We're so spread out here. Some people may have a concern with homeschools. Now, where my sister is on the East Coast, boy, there's towns and people all over the place. So they were socialized kids. Homeschoolers have meetups all the time. What's homeschool like in this part of the country, way out here?
I think that there's kind of a preconceived notion that homeschool kids might be, we were talking during the break, not socialized or don't engage in the full school experience. From the homeschooling community that we have spoken with, that have come to our Parents Unite events, these kids are among the brightest and most involved in their community. They're graduating early. They're doing well. They're excelling. They're taking advanced college courses at a young age. I mean, these kids are doing great.
Okay. So now, how, and this is the tough part of all this, how do you get rid of the grip that public education has? Because it's a large, well-funded bureaucracy. Even some places have unions behind it and all of that. So it's a grip that's been around for decades. So to make that change, there's going to be a lot of pushback.
I think there is going to be a lot of concern that we're trying to cut the public education funding, but I think we have to reframe the conversation and remember why that funding is there, and it's for the kids. And some kids will remain in the public school system if we increase competition between schools. If people have a choice in where they go and the dollars follow that choice, I think you'll see schools become more competitive and increase what they're trying to do and what they're offering. But I think that we also have to look to the Constitution and to the interpretation through the case law, which specifies education as an individual right. Okay, let's head on over to the phone lines. Calls coming in. By the way, if you want to get in, 632-6500. This is Glenn, who's on the phone.
Hey, Glenn, I owe $10. This is Cody.
Okay, you know how you know the routine. Then go.
I know the routine.
Okay.
I just I should have not called in sooner earlier. Combined them. Hey, so I completely agree with everything you guys are talking about, and I think I'm upset. I have 3 little kids with our education system. I intentionally kind of stay away from school politics because they upset me so much. But the thing that I don't understand is if we go back 50 years or 100 years, everything worked. I mean, we had local school districts, we had local people, we taxed ourselves. The school facilities all belonged to the district, and the districts were small. There was unbelievable, everybody went to this Christmas concert, whether you had kids or not, because it was our school, our pride, our taxes paid for this. And as we move forward, somewhere, when was it, in the late 80s, early 90s, they decided it was unfair that Gillette had all kinds of mineral money and had these palaces for schools. And at that point in time here in Carpenter, we had a pretty poor district, and we're having a hard time paying the bills. And so then they, really improved not improved, but upped the power of the state association, the state government as far as the education department, took money from Gillette, gave it to us. So now we're to the point that I'm not really sure what our school boards do. I mean, everything is ran through the state. It doesn't belong to us. It belongs to the state. Anyway, I just was wanting comments on that. And I agree with the vouchers and all that, but it looks to me like we're fixing a problem. If we could just back up, would be fine too. So
okay, thanks for calling. What do you think?
Well, I think the caller is definitely right that if we push funding and more accountability down to a local level, I mean, that's really the way we've got to approach this. And the legislature as a whole is looking at the funding model of schools currently in Wyoming, I think, because we are funded by minerals and coal, you know. At some point, that's what I'm talking about. When is it going to be sustainable any longer to keep funding at a level that goes like this? We're going to have to look at how it's funded. Can we cut the funding? Can we increase options? So I completely agree with that.
Okay, grab your headphones again because another call's coming in. 632-6500 is the phone number. This is Glenn. Who's on the phone?
Hi, Glenn. Excuse me. This is Maureen. Good
yes,
morning.
Yes, ma'am. Good morning.
And thank you, Miss, for being on from Liberty Group. You're a great organization here in Cheyenne. About a week and a half ago, a gentleman called into Glenn's program, and he mentioned that the something to do with the teachers union, that they had passed some kind of agreement that the schools need not teach anything prior to the Civil War. Do you know anything about that? Has a group looked into anything as far as what is being taught in the school? And if that is true, we certainly need to do something about that.
Okay, thanks for calling.
I'm not familiar with the caller's specific inquiry on the teachers union item, but we are tracking throughout the interim studies. There's one on what our schools are actually teaching, right? Because there's some concern with Common Core and what's being taught and what's not and the way it's being taught. And so there is an interim study right now that's looking at a civics education standard and also K through 3 reading. I heard a startling statistic. It's like over 50%, I think, of kids in the 9th grade can't read at that level. So, I mean, we really need to start thinking about what they're teaching, how they're teaching it, and those sorts of things.
Well, and I don't want to pick on, because there are some good public schools and some good teachers out there, but there are schools where people who haven't done well, kids who haven't done well, maybe have some kind of a disability, they find a way just to sort of pass them up.
That's so true, Glenn, and that's what we're really hoping to accomplish first and foremost, is to provide the educational access that's needed by kids with developmental delays or disabilities or hindrances. Because in our Parents Unite event, we heard a lot of those stories, and it was heartbreaking. Kids with special needs kind of being pushed out of the district because the services that are offered aren't what they need. They can't help that kid. And if they could help that kid, it might cost way too much money. And that's where an ESA program might come into play. You know, that kid could receive specialized tutoring at home, maybe in a quiet environment, whatever the child may need. That will be more accessible. And that's a population that you'll see across the states when they move toward education choice. That's what they started with.
So you're starting a white paper on this. What's the focus and where do you begin?
The focus is really how we look at the constitutionality of education funding and whether we should fund a student or a system, and what the constitutional limitations are on both of those things.
Okay. Now, where do you begin in doing all of the research? Are you beginning with the constitutionality of it or the funding part of it? I mean, how do you pour through all of that?
Oh, gosh, it's a good time for a nerd like me. But mostly what I did is I started with the Constitution, of course, but that doesn't give us a lot of explanation. Well, again, it's a breathing document, right?
Am I wrong? It seems it's kind of vague in the way it describes funding.
Right. Constitutions are supposed to be a little vague, I think, because they're supposed to move throughout time with us. And so you have to look to the case law and how that's been interpreted and overturned and interpreted again. And I've learned that in Wyoming, school finance has been very heavily litigated, it seems, particularly since the 70s. And so we have some pretty clear guidance on what kind of right it is. And it's very clear that it's an individual right, not a systematic, bureaucratic right. And so I think as we live in 2019, the question becomes, how do we fund a good public education system, paying our teachers and having nice facilities, but at the same time ensuring that the kids who don't fit into that system can get the education that they need to be proficient?
Well, then you might want to, it's my suggestion to take a look at what is a want versus what is a need, because there was a gentleman, and I want to say he's in North Carolina, and of course he's a multimillionaire, and decided to start his own school choice program. So he has a private school that he brings kids into, and he's doing the same things as the middle school as the high schools are doing, but at far less money with better results. And one of the first things he points out is, I know people love sports, but he says, you notice we don't look like we're an Olympic village. when you take a look at anything involving sports. There's not a big track, there's not a big stadium, there's not tennis courts, there's not swimming pools, all that kind of stuff. It just costs too much money. He started as a businessman to evaluate what is a need for a school basis compared to what do we want for a school,
right,
and found a way to save a bunch of money.
I think that would be a great idea. I think that what Alvarez and Marsal recommended and what the committee is going to look at over the interim,
Right.
which is how do we synchronize purchases? You know, you
Right.
have however many school districts buying their paper clips at however many different places. What if we sourced it all in our small,
get a big discount?
Right, we could get a big discount, or we could all work out deals with local providers. As long as we're working to save money and we're synthesizing things like transportation costs and looking at simple business efficiencies, like you said, if we start looking at how we fund state government, like how we would run a business to
Right.
try to make money, it'd be a different conversation. But for some reason, that's a little harder conversation to have, right?
When I was in school, we had one principal for the entire school. And that principal did have an assistant principal, which is fine, but you got to have a little backup there, especially if somebody's sick. But now we have a principal for each grade, is that right? And a staff?
You know, I'm not familiar with a principal in each grade, but
Okay.
I know coming from very rural Nebraska, it was shocking to see how many administrative positions are held in schools very normally, even in some of the smaller school districts.
All right. Hate to mess up your hair. Grab your headphones again.
Oh, you're fine.
This is Glenn, who's on the phone with us.
Hi, Glenn. It's Lisa, and I just sent $100 to the people of Nebraska.
Okay. Good. I'm glad you did that. Thanks. I knew you would call in at some point on this.
Well, I already called. I forgot that Wyoming Liberty Group was going to be on.
Okay. That's what you.
First of all,
still,
let's
you
do
know the $10 rule. Well, go ahead.
I told you I just sent $100
Okay.
to Nebraska.
No, it's okay. You're good. Yeah, you know the rule. Go ahead.
Anyway, Jeb Bush is a complete disaster when it comes to education. He's one of the founders of Common Core. And number two, have you watched any of the Alex Newman's educational videos?
I've heard of him.
You need to look him up. I have his book, Crime of the Educators, and it is a fabulous book, and it's very well footnoted. I would guess probably a big section of the whole back of the book is his footnotes.
Okay.
So I would highly recommend that he's got videos up on YouTube, and he's excellent.
All right. Thanks for calling in. Thanks for your donation as well. It's AM 650 KJB Radio. When someone calls more than once, they have to donate to a cause. That's a fine that I went ahead and instilled. So you're working with this on Wyoming Liberty Group. Where do people find your work?
Yliberty.org is where you can find us. Also,
Okay.
follow us on Facebook. We tend to update social media pretty regularly.
Okay.
So doing tons of videos and things throughout the interim. We'll be traveling to interim studies and talking with people. So track us for updates.
All right. Thanks for coming in.